Welcome to Career Practitioner Conversations. This podcast is presented by the National Career Development Association. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Melissa Venable, NCDA Director of Professional Development, and this episode continues our DEI series with a conversation about assisting clients with disabilities. I'm here with Dr. Frank Gorritz and Ken Meeker. Dr. Gorritz is a counselor educator at Florida Gulf Coast University. And Ken Meeker is a certified professional coach providing services through his company, Vitality Career Coaching LLC. Both are active members of NCDA's Diversity Initiatives and Cultural Inclusion Committee. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having us. All right. So it's again an honor to have you with us, Ken, because when we go back to the DICI conference, the topic you presented on is just so powerful. Can you share with the listeners what really inspired you to pursue this topic?
Sure, thank you. And I'm always appreciative of that opportunity to talk about something that's very near and dear to me, which is that disability and inclusion, especially within the workplace. So I presented a couple times at this year's NCDA conference, but in particular with the DICI Symposium, my presentation was on tips and tools career practitioners can use to help their clients that have disabilities, various types of disabilities. And the feedback that I received was just so positive. A lot of practitioners actually came up to me afterwards and said they felt seen for the first time because they may have had an invisible disability or they worked with clients that have disabilities. And it was just very refreshing for them to have a voice speak to that at this year's conference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so powerful. The idea of visibility and what that means to people who are so often underrepresented.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit too about some of the tools that you've noticed that are helpful for working with persons with disabilities in career counseling.
Certainly. So there's never a one size fits all tool or approach, which can be a challenge sometimes because we always want something that can be universal. And I think just speaking broadly, it's nice to have a tool that can help everybody in the broadest sense possible. But I think really when it comes to working with clients that have disabilities, there's a variety of tools. And it's really about meeting clients where they are and utilizing all of the various tools and agencies and what's available for whatever their particular disability might be, or some people have multiple disabilities. I'll use myself as an example. I'm low vision. And so the things that are going to help someone that's blind or low vision in terms of tools are going to be very different from someone that has some sort of an intellectual disability or a learning disability or any type of other, if it's a physical disability, if they have to use a wheelchair or whatever it might be, the tools are going to be different based on the disability. And so really it's more about creating an awareness of as a career practitioner, where can you look to find those types of things? Then that's really what I think career practitioners need to be better versed at, is where to look to find those tools.
I really love that you shared that response with us, because I think too, it's in such an ableist world, if you will, like so many people just assume that persons with disabilities is just, they all have the same type of disabilities or they need the same type of support all around, but that's not even the case.
Correct.
With disabilities. It's a large umbrella of a variety of different things going on.
Absolutely. 1 in 4 Americans will experience disability in their lifetime, according to the CDC, which is a lot of people. It's the largest marginalized group in the country. And far too often, it just gets grouped together as disability. But no two human beings are the same. So no two people with a disability are the same. And it can even be within the same the two people that are blind are not going to experience disability the same way. And so that's why I think it's really important to meet people where they are and address their specific needs, because just because I'm low vision and I know Braille It doesn't mean that the vast majority of people that are blind or low vision don't know Braille. And so it's never good to assume what somebody may or may not need. It's really about asking those important questions to find out what their needs are and then support them in that way.
Yes. And I think in listening to your presentation in previous events, I'm sitting here going, I think one of the most powerful tools that you shared with us is really just this ability to be an active listener and really make sure you're paying attention to and connecting with your clients based on what their lived experiences are and their needs are. So can you share a little bit more about that from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's this misconception sometimes that we have to be all things to all people and have to know something 100% in order to meet the needs of a client or to assist them. And especially with people that have disabilities, that's not the case. You can't know all the things, but what you can be is an advocate and a resource as a career practitioner. And that's why having a sort of a toolbox and a network of people that you can reach out to for support to help your clients. And even for clients without disabilities, it's just a good thing to practice to have various resources because you can't be the expert in everything. And I would hope that I welcome people to use me as a resource. And many people do when they are working with a client that has a disability and they're like, I don't know where to go for this. And I may not know, but I might have resources that I can pass on to them and help them with their client. And so that's really the biggest thing to have, I think, as a career practitioner is a toolbox and a network that you can tap into so that you can assist and guide your clients because you don't have to be the expert in everything.
Yes, I really love that you said that because I definitely see that as a major concern that impacts, especially a lot of American counselors across the board, feeling this pressure to be an expert. And it speaks back throughout our American history of the need to be an expert, a conqueror, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, but like we don't have to be the experts, right? There's a willingness to connect that you're saying like matters more.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And especially when working with any marginalized community, but specifically with individuals that have disability, whether they were born with disability or they experience it later in life, there is building the essential component of building trust with a client that has experienced marginalization often on a daily basis, whether it be in terms of some sort of physical barrier that's present in their lives, or discrimination is incredibly common for people that have disabilities within the employment space. In fact, 2020 it was either 2022 or 2023 that was a banner year in the worst way possible for people with disabilities filing EEOC claims. It was the highest number of claims filed in 25 years, I think, for discrimination with the EEOC. So discrimination is very real.
Yes, absolutely it is for sure. And it's very disheartening to not only hear about it, but to also be witness to it, depending on where you work. So I do hope for our listeners that they do take that to heart, right? That you guys, when you do see something happening, say something about it because
always
discrimination is so real.
Yeah, always report it. And I sit in on the webinars and trainings almost on at least a monthly basis where they go over some of the cases that have been settled or they're pursuing. And discrimination is very real and it's very much out there. And I think as career practitioners, we would be remiss in our duties if we weren't aware of that and weren't equipped to help clients should they unfortunately experience it.
Now, you pointed out something really interesting too, because I think part of culturally responsive counseling, and I want to hear your thoughts on it too, are like the myth breakers. So I think oftentimes there's myths that circulate around minoritized people that are prone to be believed by a variety of people who may not have that experience. So one of them that you said in particular is this idea of being born with a disability versus acquiring one later in life. Because I think some of the myths I've heard is, oh my goodness, when they think disability, they go, oh, somebody who was born with a disability. But that's not always the case.
I think very often it's not the case. I'll use myself as an example. I acquired my vision loss in 2014, and I know a large number of people that have acquired disabilities in one way or another. A good example of that would be vets. Very often it's an acquired disability for vets, and there's a significant number of people that served our country proudly that become that acquire a disability as part of their service to this country.
Yes, that awareness is so powerful. So I'm really glad we could highlight that point here, because I really want our listeners to start really thinking about those myths. Are there specific things as well, like other myths that you would like to break during this podcast?
I don't necessarily think myths, because it's, I never know there's a lot of misconceptions out there, just broadly speaking. But I think one of the main things to keep in mind is that not all disabilities are seen. Very often they're not seen, they're hidden. And never assume what somebody's ability or might be, or what might be under the surface. And that's why it's really important to ask some questions when you're first and don't ask, do you have a disability? But is there any accommodation? Is there anything that I can do? Is there anything that you need that I can help you with, or need to be aware of, so that I can be the best, whether it be in a college setting, private practice, doesn't matter, so that you can provide the best service to that client. And it's important to know that up front so that you can address their needs moving forward. Because if somebody does have a disability, it's important to discuss things like discrimination and what their rights are, and how to ask for an accommodation, because that's an essential component of employment.
Yes, for sure. I really love what you said there, because it makes me think about that major difference between a counselor when they meet somebody with a disability that is noticeable to them, or maybe it was on their paperwork. They go, do you have a disability? And like sitting there, not only labeling, but also questioning the client to be like, what is your disability?
Yeah,
But
and
you're
that's
not seeing the client beyond that.
Question. Yeah,
Go
it's
ahead.
never an appropriate question.
Yes, never. Yes. So counselors, don't do that. Do not do that. You are listening on the air.
Yeah, that's never an appropriate question. I didn't mean to check there, but there are ways of asking what the client needs, and in a way that is giving the client agency, and that's really important.
I love that, because it makes sense too that a client wants to be felt and connected with beyond just like that inappropriate question or assumption, like, oh, this is just somebody with a disability. No, this person's name is Steve, right? And these are ways you can connect with them and help them.
Yeah, exactly. The person is not their disability. They are a person, and disability is just one component of their life.
That actually reminds me of something I wanted to address with you in the podcast, because I know we've had previous conversations, and I go, yes, I live for some of that education you provided me on that difference between the terminology of a disabled person and a person with a disability. Mm-hmm. So do you feel comfortable sharing a little bit more about that distinction and why that's important?
Absolutely. And this is something within the framework of, because there are some other frameworks internationally that I may or may not agree with. But within the United States, the ADA has a set of guidelines that the ADA National Network, which is a network of regional ADA centers where they set out policy and procedure and training and all kinds of stuff like that. Like, I'm a certified ADA coordinator, which means I have passed an examination on competencies associated with the ADA in all aspects of the ADA. And so one of the things that is really important whether it be speaking to or writing about disability, is person first language, that a person is not their disability. You don't identify the disability before the human being. I am a person first, and then I have a disability, because what it does is it dehumanizes somebody when you put the disability before the person. And if an individual chooses, like, I'm okay with being known as a blind person. That's fine because that gives them autonomy and agency. But broadly speaking, as a group, it's always person first language because it dehumanizes to put the disability first. It means that it prioritizes disability over the human, over the person. And we shouldn't want that in any aspect of our of society, I think.
Period. Yes. I live for that. And I'm so grateful that we share this space so we can say those things out loud and educate people who may not know, right?
Yeah. And I think it's also important that we give people grace because people are going to screw up. Like I said before, we can't be experts in everything. And I'm going to mess up sometimes. I don't know everything associated with disability, and I never will. We have to give people grace in terms of when they trip up or they make a mistake to be like, okay, hey, that's not the right way to do that or to say that, and educate them in a kind and then going forward, they don't make that same mistake. I think that's really important because we're all going to trip up from time to time. And so I think it's important to give people grace and educate whenever an opportunity presents itself.
Yes, that's fierce. Do you feel like, too, that might contribute to some of the reasons why people are, especially folks who don't have a disability, but they hear about people with disabilities? Do you feel like that contributes to some of the fear in working with somebody with a disability if you don't have one yourself?
I don't know. I think it comes from a lot. I think I generally believe people are well-intentioned. And I think, especially as career practitioners, by and large, I think we all are well-intentioned. We don't go into this profession to get rich. So I think by our nature and by the work that we do, we care about providing something of service to our community, to the constituents we serve, to try and better opportunities for other people. And I think maybe there's a hesitancy, like, I don't know about this particular disability, and so I don't want to do harm. And so therefore, because I don't want to do harm, I'm just going to avoid working with that group. Whereas I think a better way of approaching it is, okay, I don't know necessarily all the things about how to work with somebody that's just say has an intellectual disability, right? That doesn't mean you can't still serve that client and serve them well. It just means being aware of your resources and what that particular client's needs are. And that's, I think, a better way of approaching it, because avoidance, because in a way it's a form of discrimination just by saying, I don't know how to serve that client. That's not the right way of looking at it. I think it's a learning opportunity. And because they need service, provide it to them and educate yourself on what they need and how to provide it to them. I see that as part of our job.
100%. Yes, that's why I think I've always had, personally, as a counselor myself, had an issue with this idea of, we say as a blanket statement, don't practice outside your competence. But what happens when we do that so much that it stops us from being actually able to work with diverse groups, right? And actually try to avoid them.
Absolutely. And because that's what winds up happening is avoidance. And especially with people that have a disability, so often they're passed around from agency to agency or from department to department, and they just get shuffled around so much that they give up. The individual with the disability will often just give up and say, this is too much. I'm tired of being shuffled around. I just want someone to help me. And so as career practitioners, one of the things that we can do in any setting is make sure that if it's not what, in our wheelhouse and it's truly something that should be handled by a different department, is do that handoff where we're making sure that what needs to happen happens. Not just, here's this person, call them. Where we are introducing the client to, whether it be a disability officer or to vocational rehab or whatever it might be, right? Or to some other agency or whatever, to introduce the client, to follow up with them and make sure that client is getting what they need, and to sit aside them as an advocate to make sure they're getting whatever it is that they need. Because what would we want as a person? How would we want to be treated? And I think that's a really good way of looking at it, just in general, is how would we want someone to provide service to us? Would we just want to be given a phone number and passed along without any follow-up? Of course not. So don't do that to somebody else.
Mm. If you hear finger snaps in the background, people, that's just me sending finger snaps to the fierce voice that Ken you share in this space, because what you're saying is so powerful, and I hope that this helps people who may have experienced this themselves feel validated.
Yeah, exactly, because we all want to feel seen, heard, and valued, because we all have something to contribute into society. All of our stories and all of our voices matter. And as career practitioners, while the overall goal is gainful employment for individuals, that doesn't mean we can't also be advocates and resources for our clients as well, to help them in a more holistic sense. I think that's the right thing to do, because it's what we would want for ourselves. We wouldn't want to just, that's how I engage with any client, and I think that's a good way of approaching it, is what would you want for you?
Yes. So please, counselors who are listening, write that in your journal as your affirmation for the month, for the year, because my goodness, that is a really impactful question to ask ourselves when we are seeing clients. I wanted to ask you one follow-up question, if that's okay, because I was wondering about, for the people out there who are wondering about, how do I go about creating my own toolbox? How do I get started in that? What suggestions would you have for people who are trying to get started in that?
Certainly. So there's a few resources that they're rabbit holes. So I'll just put that out as a disclaimer, because they have so much information that it's easy to get lost in it. But one of the biggest ones is it's Ask Jan is the website, but it's the Job Accommodation Network, and it's not a federal agency, but it's a division within a federal agency that is just an incredible resource for seeking accommodations, how to engage with an employer or a school. And it has links to other federal agencies and departments to assist, whether it be with housing or filing a discrimination claim, anything associated with the ADA in terms of what the regulatory requirements are. The Ask Jen is a tremendous first step in terms of understanding resources and agencies and places where there's more information available. Plus, it also has links to resources for if somebody needs an accommodation, and where can you go to get that accommodation? There's links to things like that on a state by state basis, where you need to find an interpreter, or you need to find some piece of assistive technology or something like that. There's links to all that stuff there that can help guide. And so that's probably the number one resource that I would say as a place to start, because from there's just so much that you can take on. And for anybody who wants to learn more about the ADA and engagement with the disability community or people that have disabilities, there are a lot of free webinars and trainings, and sometimes they're self-guided through the National ADA Network and the various regional divisions of it, that are very often free, that people can take or participate in. And so that would also be a really good place to start.
And when you say Jan, we're talking Brady Bunch Jan.
Yeah, JAN. Yeah. So askjan.org, I believe, is the website. But if they look up just Job Accommodation Network, they should be able to find it. It should be the first search thing that comes up.
Nice. Yes. Thank you for that starting resource. I hope that helps counselors who are listening, so that if you don't know where to start, you can start your journey with such powerful resources like Ken described.
And they can always reach out to me as well. I'm happy to field questions from people where they don't if they need a particular resource or they're not where to look, I'm always happy to answer those type of questions for people.
Nice. Yes. Please use Ken as a resource, you guys. He is an amazing individual. Please reach out to him. Your email might probably blow up now, so you're welcome.
Well, LinkedIn is also a good way to get a hold of me because I get quite a few questions there as well. So,
Spears, I think we have time for one more question of what advice would you give newcomers to the field who are trying to be culturally responsive for clients with disabilities? What advice would you give them?
don't be afraid to ask questions. Obviously, they want to be non-intrusive, but oftentimes one of the things that I personally experienced, and I know many people have, is there can be a hesitancy to not want to say the wrong thing. And so somebody just doesn't ask a question that has validity to it. And it's by asking questions that we learn, right? If we don't ask a question, we're just going to assume or be ignorant as to something. And that's the worst thing that can ever happen. And so I would say, don't be afraid to ask appropriate questions of individuals. If we show our stories have power, and it's a way of learning is when we open ourselves up to learn about other people's stories and their experience, that we can learn. And that's, I think, one of the ways we grow empathy is by hearing other people's stories and what they've experienced. And oftentimes people with disabilities, there is a hesitancy to necessarily want to just be open all the time. And so by engaging in a kind, respectable way, their story, it opens up people to share. And I think that there's a lot of power in that. Because who doesn't like to engage with other people and share their story and learn from other people's stories? I think that's one of the most powerful things that any of us have is what is our experience in the world been? Because we'll only know our own personal experience in life. We can never know anybody else's, but we can learn from it when they share it with us.
Yeah. Like, I feel like that's one of the most rewarding parts for sure.
Absolutely. And so sometimes it's okay to ask, obviously there's a way to ask and an appropriate on being appropriate and not invasive, but it's okay to ask questions.
Yes, definitely. That's great advice. Practice that, people. I don't role play that with your friends, whatever. Does it sound too invasive? This, right? I love that because I think that is an important distinction too. Ask appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's always a level of appropriateness, but it's okay to ask me about because my disability was acquired. It's okay to ask me, so what was that experience like? It's okay. And it also gives people agency to say, I don't want to talk about that. But it's
yes. I love that.
And then respect their choice. But it's not asking questions, I think, is one of the worst things that any of us can do, because it says that we're not open to learning.
Oh, I love that. Yes, there is that implication that is there. You're right.
So that's what I would say to people that are just, whether it be just getting started in the field or they want to engage in some other, maybe they want to broaden their client base or whatever it might be. Life should be about learning.
Yes, finger snaps to that. I live. Yes. Ken, I'm so appreciative to just alongside NCDA that you were able to be here and share your wisdom, your insights, and your experiences with us, because it is my greatest hope, our greatest hope probably here, that the counselors who are listening can come out of this podcast feeling transformed by your words.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. I try to make a difference where I can.
Yes, and you do. That really matters. If you're listening, please send your own finger snaps for Ken Meeker. Again, an amazing human being. Reach out to him if you have questions. I'm sure NCDA will send out that information, but I'm going to turn it back to Melissa Venable to close out our session.
Thanks so much, Dr. Gorritz and Ken. a wonderful conversation, and I'm guessing our listeners are going to be taking this back to their workplaces, and we'll have a little bit more to work with when they are working with people who have disabilities. So I'll add to the show notes some of the resources that were mentioned here. So check those links, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks.